everyone for joining us today for our second brown bag session of the winter quarter. We are grateful to Dr. Nicole Sparapani, who will be joining us. And again, my name is Danny Martinez. I'm the chair of the Graduate Group in Education, and I want to thank you all for joining us today. I'm sure we'll get more folks joining in as the along the way. I want to pass it over now to Laurel Towers, who will be helping us by introducing Dr. Sparapani.
Hi. So it's my pleasure to introduce my advisor, Nicole Sparapani, who's going to be talking today about teacher language and student active engagement in classrooms serving elementary students with autism. So Dr. Sparapani began her career as a speech-language pathologist serving preschool children with autism before pursuing her PhD in communication sciences and disorders at Florida State and postdoctoral training at Arizona State University. She's currently an assistant professor in the UC Davis School of Education and a faculty member at the Mind Institute. Dr. Sparapani's research interests center on effective educational practice for students with autism. She's authored numerous papers exploring how teacher language relates to student outcomes and has also been involved in the development and publication of classroom observation tools that measure teacher, child, and environmental characteristics associated with learning and development. In addition to her research interests, Dr. Sparapani is committed to service as a faculty member. She teaches widely on the topics of educating students with exceptionalities, and in 2019 won the School of Education's Ed GSA Service Award for her dedication to student teaching and mentoring. Dr. Sparapani is a faculty member of the Mind Institute Center for Excellence for Developmental Disability and the Mind Institute training programs, the Leadership Education in Neurodevelopmental Disabilities program, and the Autism Research Training program. These positions have given her the opportunity to advise and teach trainees on issues of equity, policy, and research regarding individuals with disabilities. And Dr. Sparapani recently received the UC Davis Hellman Fellowship Award in order to further her research into the evaluation of interactions between early elementary students with autism and their teachers during literacy and math classroom observations, in the hopes of providing better tools for intervention. And she'll be sharing more information on this topic today.
Gosh, thank you, Laurel. So thank you all for coming. I like that it's a smaller group, so maybe the numbers will stay small and then it could be more of a conversation. So let me go ahead and share my screen. And I'm crossing my fingers and toes that my internet is going to be great today, because sometimes it's a little off and on. Okay, so as Laurel had mentioned, I am going to be talking about teacher language and student active engagement, but for the first time, I've kind of put everything together. So over the last several years, I have been working in this area. And so I've tried to consolidate and put together and synthesize this information. And today is kind of the first time that I'm presenting that. So we will see how that goes. So I wanted to give a shout out to some very important folks and also the people that have made this research able to happen, including my research team, the coders who used to be in a lab, but now have been coding remotely. So thank you all. So I wanted to also, kind of briefly just give an overview of what autism is so we're on the same page. So autism is a neurodevelopmental disorder. Within the past couple of years, folks that have autism have expressed that they prefer autism over autism spectrum disorders. It's characterized by differences in social communication, the presence of fixated and repetitive behaviors, and then also differences in sensory processing. So I'm going to talk about what that looks like in terms of the classroom in a minute. So over the years, we've seen this prevalence increase in autism, and currently there's 1 in 54 individuals that have autism, primarily in boys. Last year it was 1 in 59, and the year before that it was 1 in 68. So we are seeing this prevalence increase every couple of years. In terms of learners with autism, there's been literature in the past that kind of, it was kind of coming from more of a deficit perspective. So really thinking about how, the characteristics of autism interfere with their ability to learn. But my work really comes at it in terms of the environment and really thinking about the classroom environment for learners with autism presents some pretty significant instructional barriers. And so, for example, if we think about individuals with autism having differences in social communication, classroom activities such as just participating in interactions and discussions or just answering and asking questions could be something that's difficult. The other thing is thinking about attending. So this is just a picture here where all the kids have to attend to the teacher. This is something that could be very difficult for learners with autism, again, kind of given their characteristics. When we're thinking about differences in sensory processing, it's really eye-opening to see how sensory classroom environments actually are. So again, this is just a picture I found online, but you can see how busy it is. So individuals with autism might feel overstimulated or overwhelmed by the lights, the sounds, the smells, proximity to others, the visuals around the room, and so forth. So it really is an environment that often is difficult for individuals that have autism. So with, again, this increase in prevalence, we are seeing that more learners with autism are being educated in our public schools. There are currently 120,000 individuals with autism that are being served here in California. And then when we look across the nation, we do see that it makes up about 11% of individuals receiving services, special education services. They have a diagnosis of autism. So we're seeing, again, increase in prevalence. And then this is directly related to how many kids with autism are in our classrooms. But the problem is research is slow when it comes to really understanding what best practices are for individuals with autism, how to support teachers. And so we just see kind of these really grim findings overall. Teachers report feeling unprepared. Students continue to lag behind in academics. And what is really problematic is that often autism is misunderstood. And so things that students are doing in the classroom are often misinterpreted as something like problematic behavior. So if we think back at the slide I just showed you and the idea of maybe the sensory environment can feel overwhelming for learners with autism, we might see individuals with autism trying to regulate themselves so they can be okay in that environment. And that might look like rocking or hand flapping or moving about. That might be asking off-topic questions or using off-topic language. And those are often interpreted, again, as problematic behaviors that are getting in the way of learning. And so, again, this is just a big problem in terms of really preparing folks to work with individuals with autism so that they can have a rich experience in the classroom. So my line of research begins to chip away at this. So over the past several years, I have been really thinking about what does it mean to be actively engaged for learners with autism, and how does the environment, including the specific language that teachers use, impact engagement and learning within both general and special education classrooms. So my work that I'm going to present today primarily involves using classroom video observations. And within this, I've had the chance to, again, over the years, look at student engagement, teacher language, and teacher instructional practices. So I will be talking about that today. It's important to know that the framework that all of this is developed from is really thinking about the classroom environment as this dynamic and interactive space where teachers, the language that they use and the practices that they deliver to students with autism are impacting students' ability to engage and learn. And at the same time, students' characteristics and engagement are impacting teacher language. So switching gears to the language environment, I wanted to share this transcript to get us started. Getting a message that my internet is unstable, so. So this is taken from a paper that we recently published, and it was an intervention, a reading intervention for being pilot tested on individuals with autism. So this is a 2-minute transcript from the beginning of a vocabulary activity. And the interventionist starts off with posing this open-ended question: what's a laundromat? And then she waits for the student to respond. And when the student doesn't respond, she opens the book and says, let's see, it'll tell us in the book. So the student leans forward to turn the page. One of the students says, there's 2 students here. And she says, wait a sec, not yet. And so he gets pretty upset because he wasn't expecting that. So she just says, you know, it's okay. You can turn the page after I finish reading the words. And so he calms back down, he waits. And then she points to the page and says, you know, what's she doing? And then student 2 jumps in and says, she's cleaning up. And then she responds with, you're right, she's cleaning up and helping her daddy. So then we hear student 1 jump in with laundry. And then the intervention responds to that. So this is an example of a lot of variability being used in language. And you can also see how easy it was to kind of help that student go from a dysregulated space back into a well-regulated space where he could participate. In the same intervention with a different interventionist and a different 2 students, we see a completely different story. So in this case, I put the event log here so that you can see that this every 1 to 2 seconds, the interventionist is saying or redirecting the student behavior. So as an example, that would sound something like this. Sit down, look over here, hands quiet, sit down, don't touch that. Sit here in the chair, put that down. What was the rule? Over here, come sit down, and so forth. And finally, the student initiates after 12 times of redirects. And so again, the same type of intervention, time chunk of intervention, very different. In the second one, we primarily see language being used to direct and redirect students' behavior to comply. So we could say that the quality of this is fairly poor because the learning and the richness of the activity isn't even happening. We're not seeing the key intervention material even being delivered. Okay, so this is an example of thinking about how those autism features may interact with these learning opportunities. In the second one, something's going on with that student. It's hard to get his attention. And so again, all of the efforts are going toward pulling the student back and redirecting behavior instead of working on the content. So these 2 examples are just examples to show that we see a lot of variation in the language that teachers are using, whether they're in a classroom or outside of a classroom, like the example I just shared. This also is an example of how it may be related to student characteristics and how the teacher language and student engagement are linked. One thing is the work that I'm going to present to you today, it highlights potential inequities that we're seeing in learning opportunities for students with autism. And again, kind of falling back on that idea of students with autism are bringing a different set of skills into the classroom environment. And often those skills are misunderstood. And sometimes that leads to either poor instruction or no instruction at all. So I want to talk about, again, this idea of really diving in and looking at teacher language as an intervention target. And what I mean by that is if we examine the language that teachers are using with their students with autism across contexts, that may potentially give us a very malleable feature that we could work with to help create positive change in students with autism. So we see in the literature that teacher language is an important and powerful resource in terms of learning outcomes in students. And we also see that high quality interactions that are filled with modeling academic language and using open-ended questions or language are linked to student outcomes and engagement. But there has not been a study currently that's looked broadly at this in terms of students with autism. So a few years back, as part of this larger longitudinal classroom search intervention project, I had the opportunity to dive in and look at teacher language. So within this sample, we had 194 students with autism, and there are 126 teachers and paraprofessionals in kindergarten through second grade general and special education classrooms. We had 78 general education classrooms that we examined and 116 special education classrooms. And the goal of this work was to really define what we mean by teacher language, bring together fields from the general education literature and the autism literature, and then examine whether there are differences across the language environment. Oops. So because I'm going to be talking about these later on, I want to make sure I go over them right now in pretty good detail. So we looked at 6 different categories of teacher language. The first being close-ended questions. So this would be questions that are structured in a manner that elicit a very specific response. So where did she go? And the teacher knows what the answer should be, or what is he doing? And so forth. So again, there's a very specific type of answer, and often the answer is right there in front of the student. Language models are contextual statements that the teacher is using to illustrate what the student is doing, seeing, or experiencing. So if they were looking at a book together, this could be the teacher saying, yes, I see that she is smiling, and pointing that out. Fill-ins are these kind of expectant pausing in practice phrases. So we see this really frequently in younger children, and this has carried over into the school year. So something like ready, set, and you pause and you wait for the student to say go. Directives and indirect requests I put on the same line. It's language used to direct students' behavior to comply. So in the example transcript that I had shown earlier, those were directives to comply. So that could be stated in a direct manner, like sit down, or stated in an indirect manner, such as can you sit down, but still meaning sit down. And then finally, open-ended questions, language that challenges the student to really come up with or generate their own ideas. An example here is, how do you think we can solve this problem? So when we looked across the sample of, again, 196 students, we saw in general education teachers that there was about 45 kind of bids overall. So 45 bids of language that were directed at the student or the group of student that the student was participating in general education classrooms. High variability, because we saw, again, large standard deviations, wide ranges, but we primarily saw close-ended questions and directives being used in general education classrooms. Very few open-ended questions, indirect requests, and fill-ins. In special education classrooms, we saw something similar, but more. So overall, we saw teachers use much more language with an average of 66 bids in this 15-minute sample compared to 45 with teachers. Again, high variability in language overall, but not that much variation. Within special education classrooms, we saw more directives than any other language type, followed by close-ended questions. And we saw more language models in special education classrooms. Open-ended questions didn't really exist. There was a mean of 1, and then indirect requests and fill-ins were pretty few. So we then looked at the factor structures. We were interested in really understanding what language was made up of and whether there were differences across the two environments. And we found that when we're talking about teacher language in terms of teachers talking to students with autism, the best fitting model when we compared it to other measurement models was this one factor model. It really explained the data the best. We saw good fit overall across two environments, or both environments. But the interesting thing, and something to carry away with here, is that although that structure was similar across the two environments, when we actually looked at the indicators and how they loaded onto or contributed to these latent factors, we saw differences across special and general education classrooms. So that means that, again, the pattern of language that teachers are using manifests differently across these two environments. Okay. So this was coded, all this information again was coded several years ago, and we're currently working to get it published. But one thing that we left out of that coding system, of our teacher language coding system, was really thinking about responsive language. And in the recent work, what we are seeing is that responsive language may be something that is this key feature of teacher language, specifically in the classroom environment for kids with autism. So let me tell you what that is. So as defined in the autism literature, responsiveness consists of the adult behaviors that follow and build upon a child's focus of attention. So if the individual with autism is looking at something, then the teacher is talking about what the individual is looking at. If the individual contributes and communicates something, then it's picked up. Within the general education literature, responsiveness or being warm and responsive is related to social emotional development. And within the autism literature, higher degrees of responsiveness are related to decreased problematic behaviors and increased communication. So we see this feature of talk as pretty important across age and development for learners with autism and learners without. So we then have added it into what we are examining when we're looking at our videos, our video observations. So we've now, again, kind of collapsed the definitions from the autism field and general education literature, and have been looking at teachers' responsive language as the immediate, affectively positive, verbal and nonverbal responses that follow students' communication. And that communication can be nonverbal or verbal. And so these are just some examples of how we have been conceptualizing responsive language in our data. So the student does something and the teacher says, wow, I love the way that you have linked the word shiny to things that reflect light. It's really good thinking. Or they may respond by shaping or expanding on students' contributions. So the student says, I can make a wiggle cake. And then the teacher follows up with, yes, you made an earthworm cake. And then finally, we see, other types of responsive language. The teacher says, I got a puppy. And again, the teacher picks it up and says, you did, and that's so great. I love puppies. And so what we've tried to do is say, we've tried to capture all times that teachers are responsive, whether they're just providing a quick, kind of verbal recognition or nonverbal recognition that they've picked up what the student has communicated, or whether they give more of an expansive response. And so some preliminary finding on our data looking at responsive language, we see this too varies quite a bit across teachers, with some teachers really being very responsive and other teachers not responsive at all. It would be interesting to look if these differences are consistent with special and general education, or if we're seeing those patterns across both. This currently is general and special education combined. The other interesting thing is that we see that responsive language is related to the frequency that students initiate communication. So when students initiate, then teachers tend to respond more. This is consistent with the literature on younger individuals with autism, that parents and childcare providers are responding more to kids that are talking more. And then finally, we see in our data that there are often times when teachers aren't responding at all. So if a student says something like, when are we going to take a break? Often those things are ignored. And so we see that on average, when we're looking at a sample of 15 minutes that, or 10 minutes in this case, that teachers responded about 3.19 times. So that's about a 0.42 probability that they will respond. So lots of missed opportunities. And then the last one I just wanted to show is, again, just kind of showing this variability in responsive language. So this is in a large data set with 102 teachers and 6 paraprofessionals. It's a 12-minute sample of classroom activities. And we see that the average responsive, the average times that teachers respond is about 12 times within this 12 minutes, but that range varies. So there's a lot of observations where we see, again, not very many responses, 1 to 10 responses, and then we see fewer observations that have more overall. And then the last kind of piece, again, thinking about responsive language, all of this work we're currently putting together, so hopefully we'll get some papers out soon. But we're seeing that teachers' use of responsive language is linked with child active engagement and also with their ratings of adaptive behavior and problematic behavior. So teachers who rate students as being more well-behaved, for example, are also more responsive to those students. Teachers who rate their students as being having more independence are also more responsive to them. So this begs the question as to whether teachers are more likely to be responsive to students who are well-regulated, well-behaved, and more independent in the classroom, or if it works the other way, that students tend to be more well-regulated in that space for learning, more well-behaved, and more independent when their teachers are more responsive. So this is an area, again, to dive into, to really look at that directionality to see if, maybe this is actually reciprocal. So the last area that I wanted to cover here is really thinking about teacher language and how it's tied to instructional tasks. And so this, the last few slides are, is a project that's currently in preparation with my colleague, Dr. Nancy Zhang, in our teacher education program. And so we've been working over the past several years. We've come together as I'm an autism researcher, educator. She's an educator and a math educator. So we're bringing together the autism literature with the general education literature to examine the nature of and variability in math tasks for learners with autism. And this is some preliminary data that we have. So we were really interested in, again, learning about these math learning opportunities that are presented to kids with autism in, this is preschool through 3rd grade. And then how it's linked to the language that teachers use and how engaged students are. So we looked at 92 preschool through 3rd grade students, and there are 56 teachers in general and special education classrooms. And we developed this model. It's, again, based in kind of best practices within math education. And this is a framework that is based on cognitive demand, with kind of at the bottom here, the tasks that tap into recall and reproduction are really kind of lower cognitive demand, whereas something that's conceptual or problem-solving tasks would be more cognitively demanding. So the 4 tasks that we have looked at in this sample are recall tasks. These are just, again, rote memorization, kind of the drill and kill. Procedural tasks are going to be like helping students kind of work through problems, long addition or so forth. Conceptual, really having students or helping students make sense of what they're doing. So demonstrating their learning or their understanding in a certain way. And problem solving tasks, which are, again, kind of the most cognitively demanding, and they're tapping into analytical thinking. So one thing to say before we move forward with this framework is that it doesn't necessarily, it's not based on age. And so even if a child was in a preschool setting, good math practices suggest that they should still be getting conceptual tasks or problem solving tasks. It doesn't depend on age. And then even if they're a fourth grader or a third grader, we would still see recall and reproduction as part of their programming. So it doesn't necessarily, again, it's not tied to development or age. Within this work, we've conceptualized teacher language, bringing in that responsive language piece, thinking about open-ended questions that teachers are using, close-ended questions. And then for directives, we've pulled directives apart so that we have been looking at non-task related directives, such as like sit down or look over here, and task related directions that are directly related to math learning. So some examples of those task related directives are, show me 4 counters. So a child might have some counters and manipulatives, and the teacher wants the student to demonstrate what 4 is. So it's a directing that student's behavior, but directly related to math. And so forth. So there's several different types of task-related directives, but the main thing is that we've kind of pulled them apart so that there's non-task and task related. And then last, in terms of student active engagement, we've conceptualized this as looking at how well regulated a student is, so how well they're able to kind of monitor and manage their physiological arousal to kind of be in this green space, this just right space for learning, how productive they are, so how much time they have access to materials, and then when they have access to materials, how often are they using them the way that they are intended to be using, and then their a number of times that they're initiating communication, and that could be verbal or nonverbal communication. So putting this all together, we found, again, we had a total of 90 tasks. We broke it down by tasks. And what we found was that teachers were most often really tapping into those recall and procedural tasks. That those are those lower kind of cognitive demand tasks. We saw much less often did teachers present conceptual tasks to learners with autism, and then we only saw in one occasion that there was a problem solving task. So this really does kind of just speak to what is being delivered, again, across this fairly large sample of pre-K through 3rd grade students with a range of, again, abilities and autism symptoms. The interesting thing that we found is that we saw in, again, this light blue amount of time, we added all of this up, that there were tasks that didn't fit in our framework. And so those included times when it was almost like all the learning was lost and teachers were just pretty much telling students what to do. Put that here or match that here. So we called that following directions. Tasks that had multiple objectives. So this could be like a game, and it was a math game, but then they were focusing on social skills and focusing on, sitting in their chairs. And so it was really hard to know what the math learning was. And then tasks that just the students really didn't have any opportunity to participate in. And that those were like tasks such as like listening to songs or music that had numbers in them. Another interesting finding is that about 65% of our designated time for math was actually spent on math, that we had a good amount of time that was kind of gone. And that could have been toward redirecting behavior or transitional time. We kind of captured that as non-instructional time. And then similarly, as we saw in the data I presented prior, we saw that teachers were primarily using these non-task related directives. A lot of variability overall, but really the highest frequency when looking at the other ones. We saw that some teachers were responsive while others weren't. So it's almost, it's not normal distribution. We do see kind of teachers that kind of sit on one end or the other. A good amount of close-ended questions overall. And interestingly, we didn't see very many task-related directives that were directly related to math learning. That was our fewest category here. Within our task, I didn't even put it on the table here. We only saw 3 tasks that included open-ended questions. Okay. In terms of students' engagement, overall, students within the mathematical tasks seemed or appeared to be in this well-regulated space. Again, this is defined as this able to kind of regulate emotions and behavior to be, in this place ready for learning. We only saw that they were productive at about 32% of the time. But when we looked a little deeper into this, we saw that they were only offered materials about 43% of the time. So what this means is that teachers are directing a lot of language at kids within these tasks, but not giving them anything to do. The reason why that's problematic for learners with autism is because if we look at the core features of autism, they fall on communication and language. So again, this is a barrier, an instructional barrier when students are not able to access the materials. It might be more difficult for them to demonstrate what they know if they have to use their words. And then finally, we saw a good amount of variability. A lot of students did not initiate communication, but on average, we saw about 6 times per task that they were initiating communication. Okay. So we then zoomed in and we wanted to know about that relationship between the mathematical tasks, the language that teachers were using, and how it was related to engagement. And so in those in the recall tasks that are really kind of the tap into the lowest cognitive demand, we saw low frequency of teacher language overall and really low productivity compared to the other tasks. So this is just an example from our videos of a recall task. So the teacher has a flashcard and says, what is 3 times 6? The student says 19. And then teacher shakes her head, the student says 18, and so forth. And so they're kind of going back and forth. Nothing for the student to be doing with his or her hands, just, again, answering is all that the student can be doing here. Within procedural and conceptual tasks, we saw that they were characterized by more language overall. And then when we look at conceptual tasks, we saw this kind of, more responsive language and students being or spending time in a well-regulated state more often. And so again, I want to show you this example. Here's an example of a conceptual task. And what we're thinking is that conceptual tasks are linked to teachers' language. And it's this variability or richness that we're seeing within these conceptual tasks. Conceptual tasks also include manipulatives or things for students to be doing with their hands. And so again, it could be linked to why students are spending more time in a well-regulated state overall. So in this example, the student is a preschooler and has fish bowls in front of him, and the teacher gives him materials and wants him to show what or how to make these different numbers. So he has to demonstrate his understanding of these numbers by counting out the number of fish that go in the fish tanks. So what do you see? As an open-ended question, he says fish, fish tank. So she's using responsive language here, picking that up. What number is on top? So she's directing his behavior, his attention to the top and weights. And then he says 1. So then she says, we're going to put 1 fish in the fish tank, and then he demonstrates it that way instead of having to use his words. So the last kind of question to pose in this project, we wanted to know what drives the decisions that teachers make about the types of tasks that they present. So why are they choosing recall tasks? Why are they choosing conceptual tasks? And what we found is that in part, it's related to the student's cognitive abilities, and in part, it's related to the student's behavior. And so teachers delivered more recall tasks to students who demonstrated more cognitive impairments. So they simplified those tasks for students who had more cognitive impairment. And then interestingly, the students who they perceived, this is teacher rating perceptions of their behavior. So students who they've perceived were well behaved, they then delivered more conceptual tasks. So more of those kind of rich, higher cognitive demand tasks. So bringing all of this together, when we think about this idea of teacher language, it can really be potentially this malleable intervention target that we can observe in classrooms that serve kids with autism. And the idea again would be if we help the teacher change his or her language, then potentially that will be linked to student engagement and student outcomes. We also are beginning to see that that teachers kind of vary in how responsive they are, but responsive language may be a quality indicator. So a key that it's a quality interaction between teachers and their students with autism. In terms of instructional practices, we saw that different mathematical tasks are related to the language that teachers use and the engagement or the degree of students' engagement. We found then that different mathematical tasks are affording different learning opportunities for students. So this begs the question of this idea of are students receiving equitable opportunities to participate in these rich kind of learning opportunities in the classroom where they can engage in productive struggle, or are things being too simplified and they're not able to participate in those more richer opportunities. And then finally, the work, again, this is over the past several years in projects, it's pointing to this need to really help teachers see individuals with autism as capable learners that have strengths and have competencies, and to really help them understand what students are bringing to the table, what the features of autism even look like in the classroom. And so they can begin to use the core features of autism, like potentially having intense interests is one, to really support their learning within the classroom environment. And that is all I have. I will
Thank you, Nicole. I appreciate your talk, and I want to. We have time for probably one good question. So I have someone's waiting. Sandy has a question for you, and Sandy, please unmute and.
Hi, thank you for that presentation, really interesting research. I was wondering, have you explored or plan on exploring the teacher characteristics that contribute to the variability in teacher language?
Yeah, I think that's a really excellent question, and it's definitely in line with what we want to do. So Laurel, fantastic doctoral student, has been diving into responsiveness and really thinking about what does responsiveness look like in credentialed teachers versus credentialed special education teachers versus paraprofessionals. So that's one area. But absolutely, the interesting thing is that the sample that I was just presenting, there's a lot of special education teachers that are prepared or have experience working with learners with autism. And so I'm interested in looking at how that relates to how responsive they are and what they're developing. The last thing that I wanted to just point out is what our work is suggesting is that potentially teachers, and again, if we think about special education teachers as you know, a resource that kids with autism are spending a lot of time with, they don't and may not have the training, the instructional background. So they may not be being taught how to teach something like math instruction. And so it may be, again, kind of an area across the board where, you know, maybe general education teachers are teaching math, you know, more successfully, but they might not have the language strategies because they're not understanding autism as much. So lots of areas for future directions. That was a winded response.
Thank you.
Thank you. We might have time for a quick question, or we can end here. If no one wants to. Go ahead, Gloria.
Yeah, because I'm appreciating that how you think about responsiveness in your field.
Yeah.
So in the instance where the student said wiggle cake, and then the teacher said earthworm cake, and then there was another example similar to that where the child said fish, and then the teacher said fish tank. I'm just curious as to how that's is there a way to talk about teachers who really follow and then even adopt the language of the children, or does that not really happen?
You know, I think that's a really interesting point to think about. And I think the more that I'm involved in our School of Education, the more I feel like that is important. So the training, again, looking back at the training of a lot of these individuals, is this idea of like, I need to expand on these students' language because they don't have language. But what we're missing is that individuals with autism are bringing such uniqueness into the classroom, and it is often missed. And so again, it is like there is one right way to do and say something, or one right way to look. And so teachers are not, what we're seeing is they're just not very flexible. And then it feels sometimes like it's dehumanizing, like they're not treating the individual with autism as if that person is bringing anything that's important into the classroom. So, again, this work, is new, and I'm trying to get it out there, but those are the stories that we're trying to tell to be more of an advocate for individuals with autism. Great question.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that.
Thank you all. Thank you, Dr. Sparapani, for joining us. Go ahead, Nicole.
Oh, I was just going to say, I wish we could stay here all day and just keep talking.
And thank you also. Please, just a reminder that next week we are joined by Drs. Marcela Cuellar and Dr. Natalia Dipsosa for our next Brown Bank. So appreciate you all joining us. And Nicole, I'm really excited about, I mentioned it there, we've talked about this, but the transcripts, I feel like there was so much to see there, and I appreciate the way you nuanced student-teacher talk there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think future collaborations with folks that are doing similar things, I think is going to be really exciting. So, okay, thank you all.
Thank you.